The rhythmic beep of the heart monitor was the soundtrack to my slow return to consciousness, each pulse of victory against the darkness I'd been skirting. It was October 17th, 2023, 3 days after my triple bypass surgery at St. Michael's General. I was 52, a man who'd always prided himself on his strength, now laid low by my own treacherous arteries. My wife, Sarah, had been a picture of concern before the operation. Her hand gripping mine, her blue eyes, usually so vibrant, clouded with worry. Or so I had thought. The nurse, a kind woman named Grace, was fluffing my pillows when a courier arrived, looking distinctly out of place amidst the scent of antiseptic and wilting get-well flowers. He held a stiff, official-looking envelope. Grace signed for it, her brow furrowed, and handed it to me. "Hope it's good news, Mr. Peterson," she said, her voice gentle. It wasn't. The stark, black lettering on the top of the first page seared itself into my drug-fogged brain. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Sarah was divorcing me. Filed on October 16th, the day after I came out of a 12-hour surgery, my chest still a roadmap of sutures and pain. The cruelty of the timing was a deliberate, vicious twist of the knife. My heart, the very organ they just pieced back together, felt like it was being ripped apart all over again. But this time, no anesthesia dulled the agony. A cold wave washed over me, colder than any operating room. Yet, beneath the shock, a strange, almost imperceptible sense of calm began to settle in. Because as I stared at the clinical font demanding half of everything I'd ever worked for, I remembered a conversation from 6 months prior with my old friend and attorney, Arthur Davies. A seed of preparedness, planted not a moment too soon. Sarah had made her move thinking I was at my weakest, most vulnerable. She didn't know that, thanks to Arthur's foresight, we already had the upper hand. The game had been set long before she dealt this particular card. Our story wasn't always destined for such a bitter conclusion. I met Sarah Jennings in the spring of 1999. I was 30, a junior architect with more ambition than actual projects, and she was 26, a vibrant, witty marketing assistant for a local arts festival. We bumped into each other, quite literally, at a gallery opening. I'd backed into her while trying to get a better look at a truly terrible abstract sculpture, spilling a glass of cheap white wine down the front of her dress. My apologies were clumsy, but she laughed, a bright, infectious sound that instantly captivated me. We spent the rest of the evening talking, and by the time I walked her home, I knew I was in trouble. We married on a crisp autumn day in 2001. A small ceremony with close friends and family at a little vineyard just outside the city. The early years were a blend of hard work and simple joys. I was slowly climbing the ladder at my firm, Harrison and Company, Architects, while Sarah, with her natural flair for promotion, moved into a managerial role at a boutique advertising agency. We bought a modest fixer-upper on Sycamore Street, a 1950s bungalow that we poured our weekends and meager savings into, stripping wallpaper, sanding floors, and dreaming of the family we'd one day fill it with. Children never came, a quiet sadness that we navigated together, or so I believed. Instead, we poured our energies into our careers and into each other. I supported Sarah when she decided, at 35, to leave her agency job and start her own online business curating and selling artisan homewares. The Gilded Sparrow. It was a risk. Her initial investment came from our joint savings, the nest egg we'd carefully built. For the first 2 years, the Gilded Sparrow barely broke even. I worked longer hours, took on extra projects, ensuring the mortgage was paid, the bills were covered, and she had the space to pursue her dream without financial pressure. I never once complained. Her success, when it finally arrived, felt like our success. By the time she was 45, the Gilded Sparrow was thriving, a testament to her vision and tenacity. I was immensely proud. My own career had progressed steadily. I was a senior partner at Harrison and Company, respected in my field, financially secure. We had, by all outward appearances, a comfortable, stable life, a beautiful home, two good incomes, a shared history. I believed in loyalty, in the vows we'd made. Till death do us part, I'd said, and I'd meant it. I cherished our quiet evenings, our shared jokes, the comfortable silences. I thought we were a team, weathering life storms together. The idea that Sarah, the woman I'd loved and supported for over 2 decades, could harbor such a capacity for calculated cruelty, especially at a time of profound vulnerability for me, was a notion my mind simply couldn't or wouldn't entertain. Not then, anyway. The first tremor in the foundation of our seemingly solid life occurred about a year before my surgery, around September 2022. It wasn't a dramatic, earth-shattering event, more like a series of small, almost imperceptible shifts in Sarah's behavior that, individually, meant little, but collectively, began to paint a disquieting picture. She started working later, much later. The Gilded Sparrow, she explained, was expanding its international supplier base, which meant late-night calls to different time zones. "It's a killer, Henry," she'd say, massaging her temples when she finally came home around 10 or 11. "But this new Peruvian alpaca wool supplier could be huge for us." It sounded plausible. Her business was her passion, and I'd always admired her drive. But the frequency increased, and often, when I'd call her office line in the evening, it would go straight to voicemail. Her mobile phone became an extension of her hand, always angled away from me, a quick tap silencing the screen if I walked into the room unexpectedly. Texts would come in at odd hours, met with a furtive glance and a mumbled, "Just a supplier issue," or, "My web developer is having a meltdown, bless him." There was a new passcode on her phone, then her laptop. "Security, sweetie?" she chirped when I'd casually asked. "You hear so many stories about business accounts getting hacked." Then came the new wardrobe, more youthful, more expensive than her usual classic style. And the gym. Sarah had always been fit, but suddenly she was obsessed, spending hours with a new personal trainer. A young man named Julian whose name started cropping up in her conversation with a little too much enthusiasm. "Julian says my core strength is amazing for my age," she'd remark, preening slightly. I'd smile, trying to quash the unease. She was nearing 50. Perhaps it was a midlife surge of self-improvement. But the emotional distance was growing, a subtle chill seeping into our interactions. Our conversations became more transactional, focused on household logistics rather than shared thoughts or feelings. Intimacy dwindled, replaced by tired excuses or a feigned early sleep. I'd lie awake sometimes, listening to the quiet hum of the house, a knot of anxiety tightening in my chest. Was I imagining things? Was the stress of my increasingly demanding job making me paranoid? I remember one specific incident in April 2023. We were discussing our finances, a routine yearly review we always did. Sarah seemed unusually interested in the exact valuation of my architectural firm partnership, the details of my pension plan, and the status of some individual investments I'd held since before we were married. "Just good to have a clear picture, for the future," she'd said a little too brightly. At the time, I dismissed it as prudent planning. In hindsight, it was reconnaissance. The growing suspicion led me to Arthur Davies, my family's lawyer for decades and a man of quiet wisdom. It was May 2023. I didn't go in announcing I suspected an affair or an impending divorce. That felt too dramatic, too accusatory without concrete proof. Instead, I framed it as wanting to get my estate in order, considering my family history of heart disease. Just want to make sure everything is structured properly, Arthur, I'd said. For Sarah's security, should anything happen to me. Arthur, with his sharp eyes, probably sensed more, but he was the epitome of discretion. We reviewed my assets, the premarital ones, the jointly held property, my business holdings. He suggested a few minor adjustments to how some assets were titled and advised updating my will, which was years out of date. He also recommended consolidating certain financial statements and keeping a clear record of significant transactions and contributions. Just good practice, Henry, regardless. It was during this meeting that he mentioned, almost as an aside, the importance of clear documentation for separate property if one ever found themselves in a less amicable situation. That phrase, less amicable situation, stuck with me. It was a gentle warning, perhaps, or just a lawyer being thorough. But it prompted me to start paying closer attention, not in an accusatory way, but with a quiet, methodical observation that was part of my nature as an architect. The small inconsistencies, the unexplained expenses on her business account that seemed more personal than professional, the slight, almost imperceptible hardening in her eyes when she looked at me sometimes. They were all pieces of a puzzle I was slowly, reluctantly assembling. The full, devastating picture of Sarah's betrayal began to crystallize in the weeks leading up to my scheduled heart surgery in October 2023. My cardiologist, Dr. Ramirez, had been monitoring my condition for a while, and when tests confirmed significant blockages, surgery became unavoidable. It was a scary prospect, and I needed Sarah's support more than ever. She played the part of the concerned wife flawlessly, accompanying me to appointments, asking all the right questions, her hand often finding mine. Yet, beneath the surface, the disconnect I'd been sensing had become a chasm. The late nights continued, attributed to prepping the business for while I'm looking after you post-op. Her phone was now permanently attached to her, like a vital organ. One evening in late September, about 3 weeks before the operation, I came home earlier than expected. Sarah wasn't there. Her car was gone. I tried her mobile voicemail. I called her office line voicemail. A flicker of the old anxiety, sharper this time, pricked at me. She strolled in around 9 p.m., looking flustered when she saw me. "Oh, you're early," she said, a little breathless. "I just had to meet a new supplier. Last-minute thing downtown." She couldn't quite meet my eye. The lie was flimsy, unconvincing. That night I couldn't sleep. The unease had morphed into a certainty. I didn't want to believe it, but I couldn't ignore the mounting evidence in my gut. The following morning, after she left for one of her early gym sessions with Julian, I did something I'd never done before. I went into her home office. Her laptop was closed, but her desk was a little untidy, which was unusual for Sarah. Tucked under a stack of invoices, almost hidden, was a sleek, new tablet I didn't recognize. It wasn't password protected. My heart hammered against my ribs as I opened it. Her email account was logged in. I knew it was a violation of her privacy, a line I'd never thought I'd cross, but I had to know. The inbox was mostly business correspondence, but one folder, titled Project Nightingale, caught my eye. It sounded innocuous enough. It wasn't. Project Nightingale was a meticulously planned operation for her new life, a life without me. There were emails between her and a financial advisor I didn't know, discussing strategies for asset division, how to maximize her claim on my business interests, my pension. There were saved property listings for chic downtown condos, far from our quiet suburban street. And then the emails that made my blood run cold. exchanges with an attorney, a Ms. Eleanor Vance, known for her aggressive tactics in high-asset divorces. The earliest email to Vance was dated early June 2023, just weeks after my estate planning meeting with Arthur. Sarah had been planning this for months. She was waiting, it seemed, for the most opportune moment to strike, or a moment when I would be physically and emotionally incapacitated. The final, sickening blow was a series of messages, not emails but from a secure messaging app, also open on the tablet. They were between Sarah and Julian, her personal trainer. They were intimate, filled with shared plans, promises of a future together, and disparaging comments about me, my age, my boring predictability, even my upcoming surgery, which was framed as an inconvenient delay to their plans. The betrayal was absolute, a cold, calculated demolition of our 22 years together. I felt a profound hollowness, a grief so deep it was almost paralyzing. But then, a different emotion surged through me, a steely resolve. I would not be a victim in her predatory game. I closed the tablet, placed it exactly where I'd found it, and walked out of her office, my mind racing. My first call was to Arthur Davies. I met him the next day, laying out everything I'd found, my voice calm, devoid of the turmoil raging inside me. Arthur listened patiently, his expression grave. He wasn't surprised by the affair or the financial machinations. "The timing with the surgery, Henry," he said, shaking his head. "That's particularly callous. Ms. Vance is a formidable opponent, but not unbeatable, especially when they believe they have all the advantages." Over the next few weeks, while Sarah was busy with her sympathetic wife performance and her secret plans, Arthur and I quietly prepared. We meticulously documented everything. He advised me to make copies of all financial records, joint and separate, going back years. We engaged a forensic accountant to trace funds Sarah had quietly siphoned from the Gilded Sparrow's business accounts into a personal account I hadn't known existed, a sum nearing 6 figures, likely intended as her escape fund. Arthur also, with my reluctant agreement, hired a discreet private investigator. The investigator's report, delivered a week before my surgery, was clinical and irrefutable, complete with photographs of Sarah and Julian entering and leaving a boutique hotel on several occasions. It was ugly, painful, but necessary. Arthur's strategy was clear. Let Sarah make her move. Let her file, thinking I was vulnerable and unprepared. Her overconfidence, fueled by her attorney's aggressive reputation, would be her undoing. "We won't contest the divorce itself, Henry," Arthur explained. "The marriage is clearly over. Our focus will be on a fair and equitable distribution of assets, reflecting the true nature of her conduct and her attempts to defraud you." He had also, during our initial estate planning, ensured certain premarital assets and inheritances I'd received were now held in a way that offered maximum protection under state law, a move that would prove incredibly significant. The calm I felt when those divorce papers arrived in my hospital room wasn't resignation. It was readiness. The weeks following my discharge from the hospital were a blur of physical recovery and quiet legal maneuvering. Sarah had moved out of our Sycamore Street home a few days after I returned, ostensibly to give me space to heal, but in reality, to expedite her new life. She'd taken her clothes, personal items, and, as we later discovered, several valuable pieces of art and antiques that were unquestionably marital property. Her initial settlement demand, delivered via Ms. Vance, was audacious. She wanted the house, 50% of my shares in Harrison and Company, half of my pension, significant lifelong alimony, and, insultingly, for me to cover her legal fees. It was a clear attempt at financial ruin, based on the premise that I was a broken man, too weak to fight. Our first mediation session was scheduled for early December 2023 at a neutral law office downtown. I walked in with Arthur, leaning a little on a cane, a visible reminder of my recent ordeal, but internally, I was surprisingly steady. Sarah was already there with Ms. Vance. Sarah avoided my gaze, looking composed, almost regal in a new, expensive-looking suit. Ms. Vance, a woman with a steely perm and an equally steely smile, exuded an air of predatory confidence. The mediator, a retired judge named Peterson, no relation, thankfully, laid out the ground rules. Ms. Vance opened, her voice smooth and practiced, painting Sarah as the wronged wife who had dutifully supported my career, sacrificing her own ambitions, conveniently forgetting the Gilded Sparrow's success, largely funded by our joint resources and my unwavering support. She spoke of Sarah's emotional distress and her need for security. It was a masterful performance, designed to elicit sympathy and justify their outrageous demands. Then it was Arthur's turn. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't resort to theatrics. He simply began to lay out the facts, calmly and methodically. He started with the timeline of Project Nightingale, presenting copies of Sarah's emails to her financial advisor and Ms. Vance, dated months before my surgery, clearly indicating premeditation. A flicker of surprise crossed Ms. Vance's face. Sarah paled slightly. Arthur then addressed the issue of financial transparency, introducing the forensic accountant's report. He detailed the systematic withdrawals from the Gilded Sparrow's accounts into Sarah's secret personal account, account number ending in 4732, with East Shore Bank, opened on June 12, 2023. Arthur specified, watching Sarah's composure begin to crack. He presented bank statements showing the transfers, totaling just over $112,000. These funds, Arthur stated, were marital assets, improperly diverted. Next, he addressed the issue of my business, Harrison and Company. Ms. Vance had argued Sarah was entitled to half its current valuation. Arthur produced documentation from our estate planning session, meticulously tracing the firm's growth and my initial investment, a significant portion of which predated our marriage. He also highlighted a clause in my partnership agreement, structured with Arthur's guidance years ago, that protected it substantially from such claims in a divorce, especially under circumstances of financial misconduct by the other party. Ms. Vance began to look less confident, shuffling her papers. The true bombshell, however, was the private investigator's report. Arthur didn't present it with flourish, but with a quiet gravity. We also need to address the matter of marital conduct, he said, placing a slim, bound report on the table. While this state is no fault, dissipation of marital assets in pursuit of an extramarital relationship is a factor the court can consider. He didn't show the photographs in the mediation, but he described the report's contents, dates, times, locations of Sarah's meetings with Julian, including receipts from the boutique hotel, paid for, as it turned out, from her secret account. Sarah stared at the table, her face ashen. Ms. Vance, for the first time, looked genuinely flustered. She attempted to dismiss it as irrelevant mudslinging, but Arthur calmly pointed out the financial implications, the marital funds spent on the affair. The air in the room had shifted dramatically. The predator had become the prey. Arthur then presented our counteroffer. Sarah could keep the funds she had already diverted from the Gilded Sparrow as part of her share of marital assets, though framed as a concession to avoid further legal battles over them. She would receive a small, lump-sum alimony payment, significantly less than she demanded, for a limited duration, acknowledging her initial contributions to the marriage but also her subsequent financial misconduct and the success of her own business. The house on Sycamore Street would be sold, and the proceeds divided, but only after she returned the art and antiques she'd taken, their value to be assessed and deducted from her share if not returned. My business and pension would remain largely mine, protected by their premarital status and the legal structures Arthur had helped put in place. There would be no payment of her legal fees. Ms. Vance sputtered, calling it an insult. But the fight had gone out of Sarah. She knew we had her cold. The mediator, looking at the evidence Arthur had presented, subtly steered them towards acceptance. "Ms. Vance," he said, "Mr. Davies has presented a well-documented case. I suggest you and your client seriously consider this offer." The session ended with an agreement to reconvene after they'd reviewed our proposal. The second meeting, a week later, was a different affair entirely. Sarah was subdued, Ms. Vance's aggression replaced by a grudging professionalism. They tried to negotiate a few minor points, but the core of Arthur's proposal held. The final settlement, signed on January 15, 2024, was remarkably close to what Arthur had initially laid out. Sarah got her escape fund, though much diminished by what she'd already spent and what she'd have to pay her lawyer, a modest alimony for 2 years, and her share from the house sale once it sold. She did not get a piece of my business, nor a significant portion of my pension. The look of dawning realization on her face as she understood the full extent of how her own machinations had been countered, not with rage or shouting, but with cold, hard facts and superior legal strategy, was a quiet, deeply satisfying form of justice. There were no public fireworks, no courtroom drama, just the quiet, methodical dismantling of a greedy, cruel plan. The months following the finalization of the divorce were a period of profound adjustment and, eventually, quiet healing. The house on Sycamore Street, filled with 2 decades of memories, both good and tainted, sold relatively quickly in the spring of 2024. Walking out of it for the last time was bittersweet, an acknowledgement of a chapter closed, a life irrevocably changed. I found a smaller place, a modern apartment overlooking the river, a space that was entirely mine, unburdened by shared history. The physical recovery from the surgery was slow but steady. I followed Dr. Ramirez's instructions to the letter: cardiac rehab, a changed diet, regular exercise. The experience had been a brutal wake-up call, not just about my marriage, but about my own mortality and the need to prioritize my health. As my body healed, so too did my spirit, albeit more slowly. The betrayal cut deep, and there were days when the bitterness threatened to consume me. But Arthur's calm competence throughout the legal battle had been a lifeline. He hadn't just been my attorney. He'd been a steadfast guide through the darkest period of my life. His strategy, born from foresight and a deep understanding of the law, had not only protected my financial stability but had also, in a strange way, restored a sense of order to a world that had felt chaotic and unjust. There was a profound satisfaction in knowing that Sarah's attempt to exploit my moment of ultimate vulnerability had failed so spectacularly, not through some vengeful act on my part, but through the simple, undeniable weight of truth and preparation. I heard through the grapevine that Sarah's relationship with Julian didn't last long after the divorce. Apparently, the reality of her somewhat diminished financial status and the lack of a sugar daddy to fund their lifestyle led to a swift unraveling. The Gilded Sparrow, while still operating, reportedly faced some supplier issues and cash flow problems without the steady, quiet infusion of marital funds it had once, unbeknownst to me, benefited from. I felt no schadenfreude, only a quiet affirmation that choices have consequences. My own life began to take on a new shape. I reconnected with old friends I'd neglected during the intensity of my marriage and career. I took up kayaking, something I'd always wanted to try, finding a surprising peace on the water. My work at Harrison and Company continued to be fulfilling, but it no longer defined me in the way it once had. The firm had been incredibly supportive during my illness and the subsequent turmoil, for which I was grateful. I'm 54 now. The scars on my chest have faded, and the scars on my heart, though still present, no longer ache with the same intensity. I've learned that stability can be an illusion if not built on a foundation of mutual trust and honesty. I learned that loyalty, while a virtue, should not be blind. And I learned that even in the face of profound betrayal, one can find strength and justice, not through rage, but through calm preparation and a clear-eyed view of reality. I don't know if I'll ever enter into another serious relationship. The thought still feels distant. For now, I'm content with my own company, with the quiet satisfaction of a life rebuilt on my own terms. The experience changed me, undoubtedly. I'm warier, perhaps, more cynical about the hidden currents beneath seemingly smooth surfaces. But I'm also stronger, more resilient, and more appreciative of the genuine connections in my life. Sarah's betrayal was a devastating blow, an attempt to kick me when I was down. But she underestimated me, and she certainly underestimated Arthur Davies. Her greed and cruelty became her undoing. My recovery was not just from surgery, but from a lie I had lived for years. And in that recovery, I found a new beginning, one defined not by bitterness, but by a quiet, enduring sense of peace and the satisfying knowledge that, in the end, the upper hand belonged to justice.